where to slot in the recommendations that will be forthcoming in those discussions. So thank you. That's what I have to report at this time. And Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'd like to open the floor to either our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, or our General Manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, if there's anything they would like to fill in that I have missed from that most recent meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair Davidson. We appreciate that. We appreciate the regular reports too. I take it from what you've listed, we've rejected the idea that was proposed about standing out in front of the building with a tin cup. But we can look at that later, I suppose. Let me ask our General Manager CEO whether she has anything to add, and then after that, I will ask our Chief Financial Officer. Madam General Manager.
Thank you so much, Chair Tisdale, and thank you, Chair Davidson, for the report. I believe you've covered it adequately. We have a lot of work before us, and recognizing that Stuart Summers is working in conjunction with the task force to present comprehensive and succinct messages, so board members will be very well equipped to address any increase. I don't believe there's anything else at this juncture I can lend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam General Manager. We appreciate that. And Mr. Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, is there any word you would like to share with the group at this time regarding this topic?
Thank you, Chair Tisdale. Chair Davidson, thank you very much for that great summary. I don't have anything to add. I am looking forward to this effort, and I think we will have a good path forward based on the recommendations that will be brought to the board. So thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We appreciate the report and the comments from all of you, and we look forward to more very positive action going forward to demonstrate how innovative and creative we can try to be. The next item on the agenda is our recommended actions. There are no recommended actions on our agenda this evening. Turning to discussion items, we do have one discussion item that is on the agenda for this meeting, and that item is for the external auditor engagement communications. And so we'll stay with our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, at this point to present this item. So, Mr. McLeod, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Tisdale. Good evening. I am Doug McLeod, the Chief Financial Officer at RTD. I'm joined by Pam Hill, who's a partner with Plante Moran, and Chris Gilbert, who is a senior manager with Plante Moran. Plante Moran is RTD's external independent audit firm. And before turning the floor over to Mrs. Hill and Mr. Gilbert, I'd like to just give a quick introduction to this item. So as the committee is aware, RTD is subject to a great deal of regulatory oversight as well as ongoing reviews and audits. There is a difference between a review and an audit. An audit involves specific testing, specific examination procedures that occur, and it's at a higher level than a review is. So some examples of reviews that occur with RTD. The FTA requires a financial management oversight review occasionally, an FMO review, it's also termed, as well as triennial reviews. So that's an example of a general review that RTD is subject to on a regular basis. Several audits also occur within RTD's activities. One area is internal audits, and so I'm laying this out so as to separate what Plante Moran will be doing from our other audits and reviews. Internal audits are performed by Reuben Brown for RTD. Those internal audits are really meant as more of a governance and internal governance assessment and management technique, and it's a good business practice. Also, state audits are performed on RTD by the Colorado State Office of the State Auditor, the OSA. Those audits are performance audits, and RTD is a subdivision of the state is required to undergo those at least once every 5 years. So that's another type of audit RTD is subject to. The subject matter tonight deals with financial audits and single audits. So Plante Moran is RTD's, as I mentioned, external independent certified audit firm that RTD is contracted with. So they have three primary functions that they will engage with RTD in the coming months on. Two of those are audits and one is more procedural. The first item is a financial statement audit of RTD's annual comprehensive financial report for 2023, also known as the ACFR. That financial statement is an annual statement that is prepared by management and the responsibility of RTD management in terms of presentation and preparation. Plant Moran's role is to issue an opinion on the fairness of the presentation of those financial statement disclosures and financial statements. Secondly, Plant Moran will also be performing a single audit, which is also known as a uniform guidance audit. This is an audit required by the Federal Office of Management and Budget, also known as the OMB. Certain procedures are required for that audit, and those are required for any recipients of federal funding exceeding $750,000 annually, and RTD definitely falls within that category. And then finally, there are some additional procedures that are performed regarding National Transit Database, or NTD, submissions, which are due by April 30th this year for the 2023 calendar year or fiscal year, in RTD's case, January through December. Plant Moran will be taking a look at some of those numbers and reports that we will be submitting to the NTD database. So this discussion item tonight is really a requirement by professional standards regarding Plant Moran's engagement with RTD, and there are certain communications that Mrs. Hill and Mr. Gilbert will need to give to the governing body as part of this engagement in planning their activities that are upcoming. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mrs. Hill and Mr. Gilbert.
All right, then, well, thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. We're happy to be here this evening. Thank you for having us. As was shared, and I think was a great explanation, we do have a required communication that we plan to discuss this evening with the committee. And thank you, Chris, for pulling that up on screen. And I know you've all received this ahead of time as well. This will go out to the entire board as well, if it hasn't already, but after this meeting for sure, if it has not. As part of our requirements under the auditing standards, we're required to communicate with those charged with governance related to the external audit process, get any feedback that you all might have, and incorporate that feedback into the audit process. And so tonight we have this letter that we plan to go over. We also are in the process of working with Mr. Kroll to schedule a time to meet with Chair Davidson to talk in a little bit more detail on the audit process and have some individual conversations. And that's very typical that we meet with the board chair and or the audit committee chair each year. So that, I guess, Eric, look for that email over the next couple of weeks, but we are working with Mr. Kroll on that. So a couple things. Chris is going to cover just the high level, some details of the required communication. But before I get into that, I really just wanted to kind of give you a broad overview of the audit process. The audit process never really ends. Once it's over, we really maintain a very close working relationship with your team throughout the year in terms of when unusual things come up, they reach out. We like to have communications throughout the year so that when the audit process happens, there's no surprises and that we're all on the same page. So that open communication has really been key to a successful audit process over the last several years. And this year, I think, was no different. We continue to hone in on that process, and we've actually started scheduling regular meetings just to make sure that we aren't missing something or maybe to jog their memory on different things because we know how much RTD has going on. So we've started doing that. I think that's been working out really well. There's a couple new accounting standards this year, which Chris will get into, which has led to additional calls as well. So all of those things I think are key to a very successful audit. And we've been doing those throughout the year. So just wanted to make you aware of that. And then also we did perform some interim procedures back in December. And so we're trying to move some of the testing forward if possible to help relieve some of the stress on RTD's team, because we know there's a lot of preparation for the 3 audits or the 2 audits in the 1 additional procedure that we do that Mr. McLeod's team must get ready for all sort of at one, a couple month period. So tried to move some of that up to relieve some of the stress on them. And I'm hoping they're going to see the benefit of that this year. I also wanted to just touch briefly on there's 2 new auditing standards that are not touched on in this letter that I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of. So as auditors, we have to follow various auditing standards. Hence the reason for some of this communication was a new auditing standard that came out 10, 15 years ago. There are 2 new significant auditing standards that are in place for all 12/31/23 audits. So it doesn't matter if you're auditing the local car dealer down the street or if we're auditing RTD. Every auditor has to follow these same standards. And the 2 new standards, which we've spent a lot of time working with Mr. McLeod's team on, really relate to accounting for estimates, which Chris will get into what some of those significant estimates are when he covers the letter. And we've always audited for those estimates, but they're requiring us to take an additional dive into that and the controls related to those estimates. And then the other new auditing standard is additional look into the internal controls over financial reporting for RTD. So we've always tested the key internal controls over financial reporting in the past. This is a different way of looking at them and a little, I don't want to say more in depth, but a little bit more prescribed potentially. And so we definitely have been working with your team on those items, answering a lot of questions and performing some tests around those, which we'll continue to test as we head into our audit fieldwork end of February. So I just wanted to make the committee aware, and those are new things. Unfortunately, the auditing standards and the accounting standards boards don't stop with these new items. So there's something new almost every year. This year, RTD's lucky, and there's 4 new things that they get to deal with during the audit this year. So I just wanted to point that out because I know your team has a lot of initiatives. They're very busy. We try to help as much as possible with all the tools we have. But I don't see these types of new standards and things stopping anytime soon. So we'll keep you apprised of the new ones and the current ones, and we'll continue to work with your team on ensuring successful implementation of those. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Chris and have him walk you through that letter high level. I know you've had it, so I know you have had a chance to go through it. So we'll just kind of touch on some of the key points here. So Chris, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Pam. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just covering just a couple of highlights on the letter. Not many changes from what you may have seen in previous years, but just wanted to cover some highlights here. So as was previously mentioned, our responsibility as auditors is to express an opinion about whether the financial statements are fairly presented in conformity with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. So with that being said, as was previously mentioned as well, there are a few new accounting standards that are effective this year for RTD that'll need to be looked into. So most notably GASB 96, which would essentially require you to recognize a right to use asset and a related liability for any subscription-based information technology arrangements as defined in the new standard. So I know the finance team has been working on finishing up their evaluation of the impact of these new standards, if any. And we will, once we get in there, we will audit their conclusions as a result. So this would be, the 96 is similar to 87, which you would have seen last year related to leases. So if the impact is material to RTD, you would be required to adopt the new standards. However, and we would be required to include an emphasis of matter paragraph in our auditor's report, essentially informing the users of the financial statements about the new standards being implemented. And we did this last year, as mentioned, for GASB 87 with leases. But if it's not material, it would not be required to be adopted. So we will obviously report back on that in our end of audit communication. And now just turning over to risks. So as Pam mentioned earlier, as part of our planning for the audit, it really includes us brainstorming around risks related to financial reporting and to identify potential risk of misstatements for the financial statements. And I did just want to clarify that this does not mean that we have identified any deficiencies in RTD's system of internal controls. These are just potential risk areas for us to focus on due to the industry and just due to the nature and significance of these items, and really aren't much different than what you would have seen in previous years. So the first one, auditing standards essentially require us to consider management override as a control risk, and that's something that we do various procedures to address the risk there. Another risk would be proper recording of grant funding and the completeness of your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And we get into a lot of that in both the audit of the financial statements as well as the federal awards audit. And then also in the federal awards audit, we look into the risks that expenses aren't being double counted in multiple grant reimbursements. So that's certainly a common risk among the industry. So we definitely look at that and do certain tests there. And then the last one is just, as Pam mentioned earlier, and related to estimates, just the risk related to management's process for developing accounting estimates as it relates to the net pension liability. So as you're well aware, there's significant estimates involving your actuarial report, whether it's the investment rate of return, mortality tables. There's a lot of different estimates that are utilized and relied upon in developing those liabilities. And we definitely spend a lot of time looking into and testing those estimates as well. So, and with all of these risks, we design and perform specific procedures to address each of these risks as part of our audit. So with that being said, there really isn't much else here. That's really all we had. I don't know if there are any questions or anything on what was presented.
Thank you very much, both Ms. Hill and Mr. Gilbert. We'll open up to the committee for questions, but I do have one first that I would like to pose, and that is, do we need to take separate action to adopt GASB 96? Or is that done efficiently and effectively simply by our signing this letter?
So if I could answer, Doug, feel free to jump in as well. But no, so there is no action for you to take. The accounting team and Mr. McLeod's team is working through that process of doing the calculations, reviewing all the agreements, and based on the work they do, they will determine alongside with us the potential impact it may have on the statement. So it's more of an accounting transaction than anything that the committee would need to act upon. But Mr. McLeod, definitely add anything else that I missed there.
Mr. McLeod, sir.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and from an action item perspective regarding the Finance Committee as well as the full board, where that will take place is in the full presentation of the annual comprehensive financial report for 2023. That is on the work plan schedule yet to be discussed and finalized. However, that would occur approximately mid-year, where we would come before this body and ask for the Finance and Planning Committee to approve the financial report into the records of RTD, and it would include all the required GASBs within there.
All right, fine. I appreciate that. As I say, the question arises by virtue of the letter saying RTD adopted the provisions of GASB 96. And I wanted to know, well, is that an internal accounting, our financial department dealing with that and adopting that as a practice, or does it have to come before the committee and the board formally to be adopted as a standard? So I will leave that for a later discussion when we are presented with the materials later in the year. Now, having taken up too much time on my own, the chair now asks, are there committee members who have questions that they would like to raise at this time, either to Ms. Hill, Mr. Gilbert, or to Mr. Cloud? I see Director Broom's hand is raised. Director Broom, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chair. This past couple of years, because of COVID, there were significant new federal funds made available to local jurisdictions. Do they require a lot of additional reporting, and did we comply with that additional reporting?
So I can take the first
Please,
and then.
Ms. Hill, if you would, yes.
I was going to say then, and maybe Mr. McLeod, if you want to jump in from your perspective after we're done. So as Doug mentioned earlier, one of the audits that we do perform is compliance with federal spending. So when RTD spent the various tranches of COVID funding that you did receive, those dollars were all included within our audits of the federal awards. So we did test those. They definitely were part of our population and part of our testing. We did not have any findings over the last several years related to the spending of those dollars, and they would be included in all of our reporting in the past. So yes, we definitely would have tested those and would test them as part of our normal compliance testing of how RTD is spending their federal money.
Director Broom, anything further on that you wanted to follow up with?
Well, thanks. I think that covers it. What concerned me was reading newspaper reports that some of these funds were used to build parks and a lot of things that didn't seem to have much to do, with the COVID part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just add, that was not a comment as to how RTD spent the funds, but as how other governmental agencies who were recipients of those funds spent them.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Any further questions from any other committee member at this time? We'll get to other board members in a moment, but first, any committee member with a question, if you would like to raise your hand, please. I see no other hands being raised at this time, and I see Director Brooms is lingering there, but I think that's just to remind us he's with us. What I would note is that this matter will come back for formal action, obviously, as we get the iterations of the audit. So there will be numerous opportunities to ask other questions regarding this process and regarding the results from the process. Now, let me ask any other board members who are present on the call if you have any questions you would like to raise at this time. I see no indication, so I think we have concluded this discussion item. Ms. Hill, Mr. Gilbert, we thank you very much for being here with us in this virtual meeting and for sharing that information. And we look forward, as we have in the past, to working with you on a productive process, which has resulted in the past in a clean audit. So that's always nice. We turn now to other matters. This is essentially an open forum to raise matters that are germane to the work of the Finance and Planning Committee. The chair will use this opportunity to raise at least one matter regarding the committee work plan. But first, I will ask if there are any other matters that committee members wish to discuss at this time. I do not see any hands raised or any facial expressions indicating you are pregnant with comment. So let me ask, are there any board members who have any items they would like to bring to the attention of the committee that would be germane to the committee's work? Again, I see none. So as indicated, the chair would like to share one or two observations regarding the work plan being formulated for this committee. A draft of the work plan was circulated at the beginning of this month. Actually, we had an earlier draft that was circulated in January. Then in February, we circulated a revised draft. We have requested committee members to submit any ideas they have for possible inclusion in the work plan. Next Tuesday, Vice Chair Guzman and I will be meeting with GM CEO Johnson and CFO McLeod to discuss finalizing the work plan in order to bring it back to all of you for your approval on March 12th at the committee level, and then ultimately to the board for its approval. I want to emphasize one very important point for all of you. This committee's work plan is intended to be and will be a living document. It is to be flexible. As circumstances warrant, items may be added. Items may even be removed. As I always instructed the attorneys under my supervision when they utilized one of the over 1,000 forms that I created for use in real estate and bankruptcy cases, we rule the forms. The forms don't rule us. So as and when we need to make changes, we will. And I don't want anyone to have any doubt about that or any concern about that. But the point is, we have to have a starting point to ground ourselves. And the work plan that we will submit to you at our next meeting will be exactly that starting point. Are there any committee members who would like to add comments now based upon the chair's remarks? Mr. Vice Chair Guzman, you are recognized.
So I think there's been some maybe confusion or misunderstanding on how we share that information and to whom it's given, right? So you are the chair. Do you want the emails? Do we send them to Jack? Do I take some of them? Do we need to make a phone call? Is it better written? Is there any advice on how to submit those concerns, questions, or ideas? And where are we sending them to?
Excellent question, Mr. Vice Chair. In the first instance, they should be addressed to me as the chair of this committee, but always any communication that the directors do relative to matters such as this, obviously not personal communications, should be copied to Jack Kroll as the executive manager of the RTD board office. Please make sure he is listed as a CC. And if you wish to add some Mr. McLeod on it, I'm certain he wouldn't mind. He probably doesn't get that many emails in a day anyway. So this would make him feel warm and comfortable. So consider that possibility. But yes, send them to me and absolutely copy Jack Kroll as our executive manager of the board office. Please do not include another director on the email, because that constitutes at that moment with 3 people a meeting and therefore would constitute a violation of the open meetings law. Send it to me and Mr. Kroll, and we will distribute to all and we will make sure they are discussed. Does that respond, Mr. Vice Chair, to your question?
Yes, thank you.
You are very welcome, sir. Any other questions or comments or observations that any committee member would like to share at this time? Seeing none, any board member with any comment or observations? Mr. Chair, you are recognized.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for taking this on as chair of the committee, and to Vice Chair Guzman as well, and to Mr. Kroll for working on these. I appreciate it. I also just wanted to highlight that we will, between the two actions you referenced, the meeting that you'll have next week, as well as then the adoption of the work plan by the committee, we'll have the board retreat. And we have scheduled some time at the retreat for the committees to meet in breakout to just review and take stock of where we are. So I just wanted to note that and certainly encourage everyone's participation in that effort on the retreat. So thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Mr. Board Chair. And that's an excellent addition to point out to everyone that, yes, there's another bite at the apple, which will be at the retreat that we will have at the end of this month. Are there any other matters to come before the Finance and Planning Committee for this Galentine's Day meeting? Hearing none. I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, you are recognized.
Just real quick, I wanted to thank GMCO Johnson for reporting out numbers about sales and use tax to the district by county and city. I thought that was really helpful. If you haven't had a chance to look at those numbers, folks, my colleagues, please review them. I think that they're remarkable, and it's really interesting just to see a breakdown of our district in a different manner. And I know that took some time and work. So Deborah, I just wanted to thank you, Madam CEO, and your team for sending that out to us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. It's an important supportive comment for us to make, because that is important information. And I will add that we can supplement some of that too. I remember a number of years ago when I served as board chair, we got such a report, but we also then had corresponding numbers on how much did we actually spend in providing services to each of the counties. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to do on a city basis, but we did break out what a fair estimate was of services provided and the costs associated therewith, which is another interesting comparison, but that's something we can follow up on later. Other comments, questions, or other matters for any committee member or board member to raise at this time? Scanning the screen and seeing no indication of any desire to speak, I will advise that the next Finance and Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March the 12th. And seeing no other discussion, I will note for the sake of the record that this meeting of the Finance and Planning Committee is adjourned as of 6:15 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you all very much for your participation. Have a good evening.